Check out my brand new sound design course along with all of my samples and presets by using the links below. So in Martin Garrix's last Ultra show, one of his last Ultra shows, he played so many really euphoric progressive house IDs. And even if you don't make progressive house, I promise you that a lot of the techniques in terms of sound design, mixing, and how you arrange sounds, a lot of that will translate into other genres. Even if you don't make this, if you make bass house, future house, whatever you are into at this moment, I promise you that a lot of these tips translate into other genres. And all the sounds in this are from my new production stack called Black Label, which will be a limited release coming very soon. I'm pumped, but you guys can check out the free download of that if you haven't yet in the first link in the description. Now let's get into it. Now, one of the gems that I found while making this was actually in the drums. Gonna go over that in just a little bit, but let's actually move on to the lead sound design. So progressive house leads are generally pretty simple, but there's a couple of things that we can add to sauce them up a little bit and give them a little bit more character and variety. So we can just use the default saw wave, and we're just gonna use this as a starting point. We can add in some noise. I like to use the air cans, and we're going to route the noise to the filter just so we can cut out some of the frequencies. We're going to put it to a band 12 and then make sure oscillator A is not going there as well. So now we can get a nice clean noise. And we have our saw wave. We're going to turn the envelope 1 down. You can put that sustain, you can put it to 0, but we're going to leave a little bit, and then we're going to add some release, maybe around 400. And typically inside of a lead, you would want to put it in mono, especially if you have some release there. But what I found is in progressive house, if you have a little bit of that note overlap, I think it sounds really nice. It almost sounds like reverb, but obviously it's not reverb, it's the sound that's continuing to play. So when we turn that release up, if we let go of it, it'll still play out. Versus if we add just a little bit of release, we're going to get some of that note overlap. But this is pretty basic. So what we could do is take an LFO1. We're going to put it to a sine wave because it's pretty smooth. And then drag that to the fine tune, put the rate to about 1/16. That usually sounds pretty good. So now it'll sound bad. But go to the matrix. And the matrix is pretty much just a word for under the hood of the preset. So we're going to drag macro 1 to the aux source. So now macro 1 is going to act as a vibrato mix. So we can just turn macro 1 to mix in how much vibrato we want. Maybe we can soften it up a little bit too. And for the effects, you can add these to your liking. You can add some width, you can add some OTT, reverb, etc. We can also do a variation of this as well. So maybe we can put this one up an octave, and we can put this one, we're gonna keep this one mono. And we can actually make this entire one a clicky layer. So let's add that vibrato to the second oscillator. We're gonna add the macro to the aux source. So now we're mixing in the vibrato for both of those. So we're gonna keep this one mono. We raise this one up an octave. A little bit of different tone there. And we can also make it clicky. So let's actually take envelope 2. We can put the sustain down to 0. And by doing this, this is going to give us a really short pitch envelope that we can go back to the matrix, drag envelope 2 to the source, and the destination is going to be global master tune. And then I like to just turn this up a little bit and then throw a macro onto the aux source. So now this will mix in how much of the click we're going to get. Maybe for this one, we can actually turn the attack back a little bit because the click is going to be in that attack. But in that first preset, we actually turn the attack up a little bit to make it softer. And obviously, once you add your reverb, it's going to sound really huge. And that's pretty much the principle that I use when I make a progressive house style lead. And that vibrato, you can add that to pretty much any preset for any genre, and it's going to add a little bit of that sauce. And then after grabbing some of those progressive house leads out of Black Label, we have a nice big euphoric sound. And then on the overall lead bus, when you put these into one single group, I like to cut out the high end just a little bit. Not that we lose all of the high end, but just to make some room for some of the drums that we're going to be adding later, like rise and drop claps. Some of that sauce I was talking about earlier. We can make room for that a little bit by just cutting out some of the high frequencies. And then we could throw on some sidechain. And I know this is painfully obvious, but in my opinion, it's actually really overlooked. because take a look at this. The sidechain's on 29% right now. If I put this to 100, take a listen. The lead loses a lot of its fullness because the less sidechain we have on the lead, the more it's going to be pushed to the front. So I think in this drop, we can almost get away with almost no sidechain. We need a little bit there just so it's pumping a little bit from the kick. So we can maybe put it to about 30. And this obviously isn't going to go with every single genre. There's a lot of songs out there that have 100% sidechain. I use 100% sidechain a lot. And it's more so just dialing it in and just being familiar with what type of song that you want. If you want that lead to be popped out in the front, you can get away with having less sidechain. When we have it at 100 like that, it's almost like a club mix. It sounds a little bit too electronic. But obviously 100 would work here, I think, but I think around that 30 mark's good. So for the basses, we can pretty much just have two main layers. We have our sub, which is going to be the deeper layer that you feel. Then we'll have the mid layer that you can hear. So the sub you feel, the mid layer you hear in a sense. You can hear it on speakers, on your computer speakers, on your phone, things like that. And the simple reason of why it's better to have them separate in most cases is because you can control the volume of the sub and the mid bass separately. So if you want the sub to be a little louder than the mid bass, you can just turn the sub up, mid down. So next we have some drop pads, and I like to keep these pretty simple. These ones are just going to be playing for the most part, the simple triads of whatever bass note is playing below it at the time. I like to have one pad that's not really doing too much, just giving us some more of like a tonal bed. And then I like to have the second one that's having a little bit more modulation, aka movement. It's doing something. It's not staying steady. There's some sort of movement to it. And one thing to keep in mind for the pads is that sometimes these will already be in your song. So if you're starting a song from the break or just with a vocal at the beginning of the song, sometimes some of those elements are already going to be in the song. So you can just reuse those. And obviously this was a remake, so I didn't remake the intro part of the song, but you can reuse the elements that are in your break and just make them fit in the drop by adding sidechain, maybe turning the volume down or up. It just depends. Okay, so now it's time for the secret sauce that I've been hyping up the entire time. But it's actually really simple. It's layering in rides and drop claps in your drop. And I'm telling you that these just give your drop probably like 20% more life, I'm telling you. So here we have our basic drums, just a kick and a clap and a couple of other things. Take a listen to the mix now. It sounds perfectly fine like that. But when you hear it with these elements, so right here we have some drop claps and some rides. This ride is so important. So what it's doing is this is playing on every kick. And it's also playing when the lead is playing as well. So it's acting as kind of like a high white noise layer for the lead. And it's also playing in the in-between notes as well. So it's creating some rhythm there as well, which I think is so fascinating. More rides and some drop claps. These fill out so much of the space. Here it is without. And if you listen to Follow by Martin Garrix, you can actually hear in the offbeats, there's a really bright snare, which is doing something pretty similar to this. But on the offbeats, instead of having the ride like this, there's really, it gets really loud as the song goes on, but there's an offbeat snare that goes dun, 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 dun. Just take a listen and you can kind of hear a different context of how this is done in a different song. So now, really quickly, let's do the build up in 60 seconds. So the goal of a buildup is to create tension. And if we think of tension, if we put that into perspective, let's say we're watching a movie. If we're watching a scary movie and it gets really quiet, and then something pops out, there's a big jump scare. What's the reason for that? We go from 0 to 100. Now in dance music, we don't want to go from 0 to 100. That would not be a good thing in terms of music, but we really want to go from like 80 to 100, I would say. So we want to gradually take things out. We want to remove things. We can remove low frequencies. We can filter out elements. We can introduce what's coming next. This is all simple stuff, but this is the overall goal of a build-up, is to create that tension. And you can have some sort of idea in mind of what you want it to go to. So the drop is obviously going to be 100. Maybe if you want your drop to hit harder, you can take out even more stuff and you can just add even more tension. But since we're making a song, though, we can't just go from 0 to 100, like I said. So we can have our snare builds, we can have our atmosphere, we can have all of our risers and things like that. But the overall goal here is to create that tension just like a movie does. We just want to lessen how much of the energy is in the song. And then right when the drop comes, we can bring it back just like a fill does. If you have like a little 4-bar fill, in that little space, you're almost getting lower. So we go from like 80 down to say 50. When the fill comes in, it's really quiet, and then boom. And one thing I added were these fireworks, because in the Martin Garrix song, since he was playing it live at a show, there were a bunch of fireworks in the background. And I thought it would be cool to add some actual fireworks that I've recorded and put them in the background of the song, just like you would do with vinyl noise. And at the drop, I made them a little bit louder, just so it gave the impression that it was being played live.